Bieber Fever Girl. Back in high school, about sophomore year 10th grade, I took guitar class for my first time. Not knowing anyone and being awkward, I sought out a friend. I met Diane. Diane was also quiet and kinda awkward, but we got along well. I could tell from her binder that she was a Jonas Brother and Justin Bieber fan. I didn't mind it, it just wasn't my thing. I had a friend who liked that kind of stuff, so I knew in my mind to introduce them. So when it came to lunchtime, I did. I introduced Diane to my friend Sandra. Sandra and I had been friends since freshman year. We were like sisters and still are best friends. Our friendship back then was just gossiping and me making fun of her crush on Justin Bieber. So I moved on from making fun of Sandra to making fun of Diane. Diane did not like this and you could tell. She didn't say much. She just took her lunch tray and threw her stuff away before going to the library. As the school year went on, I started seeing less of Sandra and Diane. Only time I saw Diane was guitar class, but she was quiet like she was avoiding me. After a couple months of not speaking, I asked her to help me with a song. It was a covert way of trying to speak. She did and we spoke. I asked if my jokes offended her and apologized. She said something along the lines of, "It was rude, but you're just not smart, so I forgive you." I didn't understand why I was insulted, so I took my guitar and walked away. Months went on where Diane and Sandra continued not to speak to me. I'd message Sandra on Facebook asking, "How's she been and why was she avoiding me?" She would always reply with, "Can't reply, talk to you later." Weird. So it was maybe February now, where I made all new friends. Sandra and Diane still avoided me like the plague. I guess Diane wasn't here on this school day, because Sandra approached me to talk. Sandra pulls out her phone and goes on Twitter to show me Diane's posts. They were vague, but you could tell they were about me. "This girl talked crap about Joe Jonas. I can't wait to strangle her. How can you say Justin Bieber is ugly when you'll be dead?" It was creepy. Sandra went on to explain that Diane persuaded her to stop being my friend because of my dislike for Justin Bieber and the Jonas Brothers, that I'm not interesting enough or bring enough to the table. It was hurtful, but I was more focused on the creepy threatening tweets. The next day I asked Diane in guitar class about them. Her face went cold and pale, like she had seen a ghost. She explained she meant it, and if I come near her or Sandra again, she'll really hurt me. I was scared for once. So like I should, I went to the vice principal about it. I explained that she'd been writing threatening tweets about me. She burst out crying there at his desk, claiming I was bullying her. The VP claimed, "If it's tweets, nothing can be done." Then reminded us once again to not use phones during school hours. I was livid. How dare she spin this to make me look bad? I never once bullied her. I told Sandra what she said, and then I went to the principal. Sandra agreed she was crazy and wanted nothing to do with her, so we both avoided Diane. Diane left after that year. So Diane, let's never meet again. Mine. So this story was on Reddit Let's Not Meet, but I ended up deleting it since nothing paranormal activity happened, and didn't really think it fit the category. I was about 14 years old at the time. In fact, it all started about a few months after my 14th birthday. I was really good friends with this girl that I met during 7th grade. When we met, we instantly clicked. We pretty much had the same interests in everything, and there wasn't really a friend to best friend stage. It just jumped from not knowing each other to best friends. Anyways, during that time, I came to realize that my friend was a really big fan of a famous singer. The reason why I say famous in quotes is because he was known, but not extremely well known. It usually would have small shows around where he lived and the surrounding states, and there would be about 100 or so people attending his concerts. I was pretty excited when I heard that she knew who he was, and I explained to her that I already met him 3 different times. He was a really chill dude, and he actually communicated with his fans, unlike most of the singers today, who most of the time give you a nod or a wave and just leave. In fact, at the end of his shows, you should usually just walk up and talk to him for a few minutes at the back of the building. Just like any fangirl, she immediately asked me if I could take her to meet him. I told her that the next time he came to our state, I'd see what I could do. I just want to explain something very quickly. I do not know the singer personally. Me and him aren't friends. I don't have his phone number, street address, email, or anything that allows me to be able to contact him directly. My boyfriend during this time was in a band and would often play shows throughout the states. Anyways, him being in a band gave him advantages. He got to meet a lot of really famous bands and singers, and being his girlfriend during the time, I would often go to his shows and get to meet the other bands after the concert. That is the only way I got to meet him that many times. So 3 months go by. My friend comes running up to me telling me that he is going to be playing in my state in 3 weeks and we need to get shows immediately. So I get the tickets the same day, which was pretty easy considering that he wasn't well known and that my boyfriend could help me out. Though eventually I started to realize that my friend started to grow an obsession over him. I didn't really think much of it then, I just thought it was more normal for any teenage girl, so I shrugged it off. I did find it annoying at the time though because she would always talk about him. When I say always, I mean it. She would somehow get him into the topic even though what we were talking about had absolutely nothing to do with him. I'd understand if his name came up if we were talking about music, but his name would come up if I was talking about my family or friends or what me and her were going to do this weekend. It was crazy. Fast forward to 3 weeks, and it was the day of the concert. I apologize for all the time skips, but I don't want to bore you with all the unnecessary details. So the plan was, she was going to come over to my house, my parents would drive us there, drop us off, and pick us up 30 minutes after the concert is over, so that we had enough time to say hi and talk to him. The concert was amazing like I expected, and everyone flooded out the doors, most not even stopping to meet him. As my friend and I approached him, she was spazzing out, jumping up and down, squealing, pretty much everything crazy fangirls do. He was outside of the building that he just performed in with the rest of his band members, smoking a cigarette. Now, he was and is a really attractive guy. He had really long hair, probably 5 or 6 inches past his shoulders. I could never tell if his hair was dark brown or just black. He isn't a really tall guy, maybe 5'6" or 5'7", but it suited him. He immediately acknowledged us. In fact, he actually remembered who I was and asked about my boyfriend. I talked to him for about a minute or so, until my friend started just spewing stuff out at him. I can't remember everything that she said, but it was pretty nasty. Like all the stuff she wanted to do with him, that she was in love with him, that she wanted to have his baby, stuff like that. Being the kind of guy he was, he just awkwardly laughed it off. I knew he was uncomfortable by the way he held himself and his body language. I remember I tried to make my friend be quiet for a few times, but she just waved me off and told me she knew what she was doing. She then started to scream at him that he had to marry her, or that she would commit suicide that night, and that him and her were soulmates. At this point, he wasn't really saying anything, but he didn't walk away either, he just kinda stood there. But when he didn't reply to her demands of marriage, she flipped out more and started to hysterically cry. At that point, I knew that I needed to take her away from him and quickly. She was kind of bent down and keeping her face hidden. I attempted to grab her arm and pull her away from him, but she yanked her arm away, sprinted to him, and actually somehow managed to pull some of his hair out. It wasn't a large amount of her hair that left a bald spot on his head, but it was a good amount. He then shoved it into her jeans pocket and started to walk away. After what she did, I swore I was going to have a heart attack. Honestly, at that point in time, I don't think either him or me knew what really happened. I was really flustered, and at some point, I remember crying because I was scared. Interestingly enough, he didn't call the cops. I find it hard to believe he didn't, given the situation that we were in. I probably apologized to him a billion times before I left to find my friend, but still to this day, I still sincerely feel bad for what my friend did to him. Oh, but that is not the end. In fact, it is just the beginning. The drive home was extremely awkward, and during that time, I refused to talk to her because of how upset I was. But a few days later, after the intense anger I was feeling towards her ended, we started to talk again. She would not stop texting me and calling me, so I gave in. Shortly after the incident, she then started to explain how she would see him all the time and how she believed he was stalking her. She would tell me how he would come to her in her dreams and tell her he loved her so much and that they were meant to be together. Sometimes she would even tell me he would sneak into her room late at night and sleep with her, and then tell me how much they were going to get married. I didn't tell her during this time he actually left my estate the day after the concert, so there was no physical way he could have done all these things she was saying that he was doing, but I let her talk. I didn't want to tell her he was gone, because I was scared of what she was going to do. Actually, during that time, I was doubting my friendship with her, but I continued to stay her friend. That was until about a week and a half later, I was over her house to spend the night. She was in the bathroom taking a shower and getting ready because we were about to go out for the night. I was in her room sprawled across her bed when I had a sudden urge to look up at the ceiling. I couldn't help but to get a little panicked at the time when I looked up, because her entire ceiling was covered in hundreds of pictures of the singer. I really didn't want to be at her house anymore, so I repacked my bags quietly so she wouldn't hear me, but unfortunately, she got out of the shower before I could leave. She came into my bedroom to come across me, holding my bag. Her eyes kind of widened in disbelief at me. What was the weirdest thing was that she had the hair she pulled at a singer's head, attached to her own hair by a hair tie. At that point, I felt like I needed to get out of the house. Me and her were home alone. I was terrified. She was bigger than me and stronger, so I had a difficult time getting her off. She lunged at me and wrapped her arms around my throat. While she was on me, she was screaming at me, saying things like I can't take him away from her, that he was hers, that if I didn't take her to see him again, she was going to kill me. I honestly don't know how I got out of that situation, but I do remember immediately telling my parents about the incident, and then not soon after, the police got involved. My friendship with her, after that, went down the drain. I switched phone numbers, and about 6 months later switched schools because I moved. I don't know what happened to her, and to be honest, if she got arrested or sent to a mental institute or what, I sincerely don't want to know. I do feel like there was something wrong with her and that she needed help. If anyone has any questions about anything involving this story, please feel free to ask. I don't want to say I don't feel comfortable telling you the name of the band or the singer that was involved, since I don't think it's the right thing for me to do. The Fangirl. This is on a throwaway because I'm still afraid it'll be connected and I'll continue to get worse now that it seems to have abated for a while. I am, or was at least, an internet person. I started a little personal blog about nothing really important back in the late 90s, and it continued for well over 10 years. Even though I wrote about nothing more than random life stuff and parenting my kids, it briefly got a moderately popular. I'm not exactly a people person. That's why I became an internet person in the first place. So the popularity was more than a little uncomfortable for me. But after a while, it wasn't so bad. It was nice having people sympathize with crap you're going through, celebrate life's little joys with you, and just talk. I never felt better or higher than anyone. It felt more like walking into a big sort of Survivors of XYZ Anonymous room where you could all talk as equals and everyone had an audience for what they were saying who were actually listening. That's a nice feeling, no matter where you're coming from. I'm a very shy, neurotic sort, and I don't like interacting with people, particularly in groups, so this was a nice medium to be able to socialize with people in a safe way. What isn't so nice is the side effect of any sort of popularity, even really low end: fangirls and trolls. The fangirls usually come first, and it's more than the average, "Hey, I like your blog," people. It's the "everything you say is like gospel and I love you" people. After that comes the crazies that are polar opposite, generally because they're disgusted by the fangirls and decide themselves better for not having that level of devotion or care. And while the fangirls will go out of their way in hopes of one day catching a glimpse of you at a grocery store, the trolls will go out of their way in the hopes of one day finding some random thing you said to twist into a barely believable story to call CPS over so they can giggle while you undergo a traumatic false investigation. And sometimes these things overlap into an obsessive fangirl, which is what I'm going to be talking about today. I met her in various communities and in blog comments relatively early on, and she seemed like a normal, nice enough person. I never got the inclination that she was crazy or weird about anything, and eventually I started reading her blog as well, and everything seemed pretty normal. She commented on everything I wrote, no matter what it was, and always had something to say. I was a lot more polite and much more of a doormat back then, so I felt it necessary to try to at least say something back when she asked questions or engaged in what I felt like an attempt at conversation. I didn't want to seem like a self-absorbed dick. Eventually, my family and I made a big move, and we just so happened to be moving to the same town she was in. This felt neat because hell, I'd already knew someone and have a friend, and as someone who is a chronic loner, this seemed pretty cool to be honest. I vaguely knew 2 other online people from the same area as well, so bonus. Very shortly after I arrived, her youngest child had a birthday party and she gave me an invite. Thinking her as just a friendly face, I decided to come and finally meet this nice lady. I was heavily pregnant at the time and was so easily recognizable from a distance. She was having a party for a toddler in a public park, and as I approached, she must have recognized me pretty easily and almost literally dropped her baby on the ground and ran at me across the field. I was a little taken aback at this, but smiled politely nonetheless as she approached. When she got near me, it became clear she was just not a regular friendly face. She was already near hysterical crying. She blubbered out her barely comprehensible, it's you, as though I was some sort of famous celebrity and not a random parent on the internet. I was incredibly uncomfortable at this point, but tried to politely smile and just brush it off. She reached out and grabbed my face and started stroking my skin, my hair, my cheeks, my shoulders. Her hands were all over me, and in my shock and shyness I stood there, stunned, and neither did nor said anything in protest even though I was deeply, horribly uncomfortable. "You're so beautiful. You're beautiful!" she sobbed as she continued to stroke me up and down. I am a survivor of sexual abuse both in childhood and in adolescence, which may even have been something she'd known having read my very intimate parts of my blog, and this was definitely the sort of behavior that brings that shit up in a big way. To be completely honest, I was in and out of the next few hours. I don't even remember how I got home, but I knew that once I zoned out, she spent a lot of time leading me around, touching me, and even telling her other 9-year-old child, "This is the person I've told you about. She helps people. She's beautiful." If there weren't witnesses who became actual real friends to this behavior, I would chalk it up to some sort of waking nightmare. It was one of the most surreal and disturbing experiences I've ever had. After this, I wasn't sure what to do. I realize that sounds rather weak and pathetic, but I suppose that's the kind of person I was at the time, weak and pathetic. I just barely come out of an extremely traumatizing experience and was in the midst of some very intense grief and mental strife. I was weak. I was lonely. I wanted friends, and I wanted to believe this behavior was a silly fluke, and I could have normal friends like a normal person. I figured maybe if I have a few playdates with her kids and she sees me as just a regular person, this will all become a hilariously embarrassing thing of the past. That was probably one of the stupidest ideas I've ever had. I'm embarrassed to admit it, and embarrassed to even have thought of it. Suffice to say, it did not turn out as I'd hoped. Twice, I even invited her to my kids' birthday parties, still under the false hope that she'd viewed me as a normal person and a normal friend if she had regular experiences with me. I mean, maybe she's just a super lonely person going through some shit and was just overwhelmed to meet another mom friend. The denial I was in was pretty deep, even as my entire brain was screaming, "This is not okay, run!" I still wanted to believe the best of people. She seemed to spend the entire time just blindly staring, as though in love, or mindlessly agreeing with everything I'd say. Compliments from her never, ever sounded normal. They sounded creepy and obsessive, and even my family was noticing and getting weirded out by all this. After that, I decided that this maybe wasn't worth it, and tried to very slowly dislodge myself from her. What I didn't know is that the few times she actually came to my house, she was apparently taking notes. She'd share every tiny detail she saw, but skewed and distorted on various forums. I only heard about this much later from other people, mutual friends who became concerned about her behavior after recognizing the very worrisome signs. She'd do things like try to take very old home movies, some so old they'd been or mislabeled from our cabinet, and when apparently unsuccessful, would make up strange stories online about what they were really about and create narratives about the secrets they held that only she was privy to as a best closest friend. Around the same time, I started getting vaguely threatening messages on various social networking sites. usually from anonymous sources, about things that were in my medicine cabinet, on my bookshelf, or other bizarre and creepy things that people couldn't possibly know. A few times an IP address was left behind, and I was able to trace it to a local tower, which scared me all the more. But even then, I was somehow convinced it wasn't her, because I didn't want to believe this kind of shit could happen to me. Worse, sometimes, these came from multiple accounts, because she spread these strange stories to the troll types who absolutely ate them up, and it became a fun game to scare and harass me with these half-strange truths that were just true enough to be terrifying, and yet untrue enough to be bewildering. Things like what store I shopped at what time, but not quite what I bought, what park I went to on what evening, but not what I did there. If I ever so much as barely mentioned it, she'd always be there to reassure me of how nuts and jealous these people must be. Not like her, not like a real friend. Over a period of a few months, I ignored her, enough for her to get the message, and things went from weird to insane. The stories and anonymous threats ramped up tenfold, sometimes obviously from her and sometimes from whoever she could get added to her, because I'm sure her stories were intriguing bait to those types. Even after I blocked her on every social media site I could, I get alerts from other friends or even random concerned online citizens that she knew things and copied things from my life she couldn't possibly known from online activity. If I dyed my hair, her hair had the same color and a style a week later, even if I never posted about it. If I knitted something for my kid, she knitted the same project. If I went across town to a new store, she was talking about how great it was to shop there too. It occurred to me that she knew where my kids went to school, and I had to add her name and description to the emergency list of people to never, ever release information to, because she was actually seen there even though her children didn't attend that school. I went to the police with this when I realized she was doing drive-bys by my house, but their answer was simply to ignore it or to block her because it involved the internet. I was advised to contact them if she escalated. Eventually, my participation in anything online dwindled to nothing, and very slowly the harassment died out, though even after a year it still pops up from time to time in great spurts. My family has moved, my children changed schools, my spouse changed jobs, and because I know she's still in the city, I know there's a possibility she has still tracked this all down. I wish I wasn't paranoid about her influence, but I am, because I know this isn't a part of my own fault for believing she was harmless and thinking I could simply show her how misguided her thinking was. Chalk this up to one hard-learned lesson.